Hey, what's going on guys? This is Jake at That Fit Friend, and today we're gonna be talking about rotating footwear. So if you are new to my channel or if you've been around for a while, then you know that I like to review barefoot shoes and training shoes, and I'll spice it up with some running shoes here and there. And all the while, I think folks get in their head and they think that they have to box themselves into one type of shoe. I don't think of shoes like that. I look at shoes as tools based on the task and workouts at hand that I'm doing. And so in this video, I want to discuss how I like to rotate my footwear, and then hopefully you can kind of take some of those notes and contextualize it for your needs. I'm not saying that this is the only way you can wear different types of shoes, or like this is the one gold standard for rotating your footwear. This is just how I like to do it. But all that said, let's dive into why I like rotating my footwear. So before I dive into why I rotate my shoes, let me add a little bit of context here. So every single week, I subscribe to what I would call a hybrid or athletic style of training. The fitness industry loves to create boxes around different training things so they can market them to you. Hybrid training is really in right now. I basically like to do a little bit of everything. I like to train all the different athletic attributes. So I like to lift heavy, run, sprint, move fast, etc. Now, why I like to rotate my shoes for this type of training is because those sessions throughout my week will vary regarding their intensity on my body and the demands that they're gonna have on my body. So for example, let's say I'm doing a session with a lot of plyometrics. That is gonna create a higher demand on my feet, ankles, and body compared to something where I'm just doing like more of a bodybuilding or a bro session, or even just a static strength session or a lower body session where I'm not necessarily doing a ton of power focused exercises. So when you consider that different workouts are gonna have different demands on the body, you can start to really hunker in and dial in what types of shoes will make you feel best for those workouts. So for example, if I have a lot of plyometrics and I wear a barefoot shoe, I know that my feet and ankles are gonna take a bigger beating than if I were to wear a training shoe that has a little bit more cushion, or a shoe that's gonna be a little bit more dialed for that type of training regarding giving me more cushion, comfort, and responsiveness. Now, why is that important? Why do I think about that? Well, let's say I have that session with a lot of plyometrics, and then the next day I know I'm doing a run. I don't want to go into my plyometric session wearing a barefoot shoe, giving myself a ton of ankle and foot fatigue, and then go into my run with fatigued lower extremities. I think that can be counterproductive. So in my mind, I would rather use a shoe or a tool that is going to set me up for success for my next session, that's going to give me the best outcome. So really, when I am considering shoes and why I like to rotate shoes, I'm considering the best outcomes for the session at hand and then the session to follow. I think a lot of times folks just think about the session at hand and then they kind of limit themselves for their next few sessions, and they end up either beating themselves up or getting too sore, and then their next sessions are haphazard, and then you kind of get into this negative feedback loop with kind of feeling run down, going into a session run down, and then you're pushing run down again, run down, run down. And so when I rotate footwear, and why I like to rotate footwear, is solely based on giving myself the best outcomes for my full week of training and for my sessions that I know are coming, and giving myself the best outcomes for the session at hand. All right, so now let's add some layers and context here, and I want to help you kind of create a game plan for how to rotate your footwear based on your goals. So there are two things that I want you to consider. Number one, I want you to think about your training block goals. Think about the goals of your training block as a whole. Do you have multiple goals? What is the hierarchy of those goals? What does your training block physically look like? The second thing that I want you to consider is your ability to wear barefoot shoes all the time. How acclimated are you to this type of footwear? This will heavily dictate how often you're rotating between, like, let's say a running shoe, training shoe, and barefoot shoe. And that's something that I think often gets overlooked, and I get a lot of comments on videos of, oh, I switched to barefoot shoes full time and now my feet are all beat up and I actually don't like them. That's not where I want you to get. And I think a lot of folks who kind of have this dogmatic approach to barefoot shoes, they get people stuck in this cycle because they don't necessarily tell them how to acclimate or help them acclimate regarding their training needs. So when we're talking about training block goals, I want you to focus on what you want most out of your block. So a great example here is, let's say I'm doing a 6-week mesocycle. In this mesocycle, I know that my running volume is going to increase. If that is the case, I will typically opt for barefoot shoes a little bit less, especially on days before my runs or on days where there's a lot of high intensity, a lot of high impact impact movements. Because my running volume is increasing, I know my feet, ankles, and just lower extremities as a whole, they're gonna be getting a little bit more tired. So I will typically opt for shoes that are gonna set me up for the most success there, and then save barefoot shoes for more of my static lower body days, or just walking, or for my upper body session. I wanna still give my foot the ability to move and expand and really feel the ground, but I don't necessarily wanna wear barefoot shoes all the time, because as running volume increases, I know for a fact that if I'm wearing barefoot shoes all the time, even though I've acclimated to this type of footwear for the last 7 years, I am still gonna feel pretty beat up. Conversely, if my running volume is down and it's low, or it's static at a point where I know I can maintain it pretty easily, I'll rotate shoes a little bit more regularly, and that just depends on what I want out of my session. Let's say I'm doing like a deadlift session with some box jumps or some plyos and then some accessories. On that type of day, I'll typically opt for either or. If I wanna have more ground feel and get close to the ground and my deadlifts are heavier, I will typically go with a barefoot shoe, knowing that when I do my plyos, I might have some more impact on my feet than normal. And then conversely, let's say I have a deadlift session that's a little bit more moderate with its load, but then after for my accessories, I have more Metcon and WOD style work, I'll opt for a training shoe, and that way I don't have to swap into different shoes throughout my session. However, sometimes I will when I'm feeling myself. So all that said, as you start to dial in your training goals, it gets a little bit easier to kind of pick and choose which shoes will help you perform your best based on the nature of the layout of your program and what you're trying to achieve with it. Now, the second element is barefoot shoes and how much time it takes to acclimate to these shoes. So if, for example, you have never worn a barefoot shoe in your life and you're not really accustomed to walking around barefoot a lot, then in your case, you're gonna wanna ease in slower with barefoot shoes, and you'll wanna be a lot more strategic with your rotation of footwear. More than likely, you'll wanna start wearing barefoot shoes for sessions that are a lot more low stem. So for example, just static lower body days where you're doing things like split squats, squats, nothing too high impact, or just for upper body days where you'll get the flex and feel of the barefoot shoe without it necessarily beating up your feet and ankles a ton. This is a nice sneaky way to acclimate to this type of footwear without necessarily creating too much fatigue too fast. Now, if you are somebody who is regularly used to being barefoot, or you've worn barefoot shoes before, you can get a bit more strategic, and then we could also circle back to your training block goals. Let's say you're in that block where your running is consistent, or you're not even running really at all, but you really want to focus on your feet and ankle strength. In that case, you can wear barefoot shoes a lot more often because they're going to give you a higher stress and stimulus for those goals. And so that said, when you are starting to wear barefoot shoes, and if you're starting to implement their rotation in with training shoes and running shoes, really be mindful of your experience being barefoot. This type of footwear will place a higher demand on your feet and ankles, and that is something to consider, especially if you are somebody who is also running, lifting, doing power focused exercises, doing HIIT workouts, and basically anything where you're gonna have a lot of impact on the feet. You don't want a shoe to hinder your progress just for the sake of wearing that shoe, especially when there are options that can allow you to perform really well, and then you could also still wear a barefoot shoe strategically to get the benefits of them. And so to conclude this video, hopefully you're able to kind of start to pick and choose which shoes would be best for your workout sessions. It is normal to kind of plug and play with different types of footwear based off of what you're doing to see what allows you to perform your best. This is literally what I've been doing for the last 7+ years. It is kind of my job, and hopefully this video can help shed some light as to how you should rotate shoes as well if it's something you plan to do. You don't have to rotate shoes by any means, especially if you don't want to buy multiple pairs of shoes. But if you are somebody who is like, okay, I do want to wear a barefoot shoe to get the benefits of them, but I also still want to wear a cross training shoe for WODs and lifting and whatnot, then I also want to wear a running shoe and a weightlifting shoe based off of what I'm doing. Like, this video is for you, and hopefully it can be helpful. But if you have additional questions on this video, please drop a comment down below and I will answer whatever you have. I might build a future video going through a full week of training and really showing you how I like to wear different shoes in different settings based off of what I'm doing and what I'm trying to accomplish. I think that could be really interesting, giving you more of a first take on that. But all that said, y'all, drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next one.